Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonia.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here. Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Sonia. This is the first time we've done a winter farmers market
Is that
episode.
true?
It is true.
Wow.
It's true. I almost can't believe it, but I was looking back and it is the first time we've talked about the winter farmers market. And I have to tell you, it's a great time to be at the farmers market. It's a surprising time to be at the farmers market. And I also had a client once say to me, what are you even buying at the farmers market in the winter?
First of all, I'm so happy you pointed out we haven't done this before, because the winter farmers market is also one of my favorite times of year, with a caveat. There's nothing like California winter farmers markets. I love the Pacific Northwest.
We're very lucky.
No one can match what you all have down there. But even in Portland, I actually think January, February can be a really special time at the market. And I actually think it's easier to shop now than in March and April here in the Northwest. And I am still doing market tours. We've had so many listeners come and join me at the Portland Farmers Market. I am still doing that all through the winter. We'll link so you can sign up if you're interested in our show notes. But yeah, it's so fun to take people to winter's market and be like, did you know there's these amazing greens that only grow this time of year? And these amazing root vegetables that are particularly sweet right now.
I will say a lot of the vegetables that we are going to talk about today are not really vegetables I necessarily grew up eating or cooking. Even something like cabbage, which I ate as coleslaw. My mom never cooked cabbage, or I never ate a parsnip until I was in my 20s. But I think one of the things that I do at this time of year is I really use cookbooks. And a couple of the cookbooks that I use are more of those index-based cookbooks that are alphabetical order. And so if I find parsnips and I'm like, ooh, what do I want to do with them? I just thumb to the chapter that has all the parsnip recipes. A lot of the recipes that I am using today come out of a cookbook I found in New York over break called Green on Greens. I went to Bonnie Slotnick Cookbooks, which is a favorite of ours.
It's an amazing culinary bookstore in New York City. So special. So many rare vintage cookbooks are there.
Yeah, and just a lot of cookbooks that are used and were loved by someone previously.
Well, I love being introduced to another vegetable cookbook. I have to say, I am just like you. This is a time when I really rely on my physical cookbooks even more than the internet. And some of the ones that I think carry me the most through the winter are Six Seasons by Joshua McFadden, Martha Holmberg.
Which you gifted to me. I love that book.
It's such a great vegetable cookbook, and it does it by season. So you can go to winter and really see what's good right now. Anything by Deborah Madison, which you gave me my first Deborah Madison vegetable cookbook, which she has,
which a client gave to me.
Yeah. I have to say also the Alice Water books, the Chez Panisse cookbook, or anything she's written.
I grew up in the Midwest, so seasonality was different where I'm from. But I think about the California cooks, or this man, he has a lot of sort of British recipes. It's like the Brits figured out all these great things to do with vegetables in the winter because
they have to.
Cool. They have to.
And I have to say the same is true of Slavic peoples. You know, my family relied on beets and cabbages and potatoes and root vegetables. My first item that I want to talk about, I want to talk about sweet potatoes, which you can find at the farmer's market, but you can also find at any grocery store. Obviously, you can find them year round, but I do think of them as being particularly good in the winter. And I've been dying to share something with you because I know you're not really on TikTok, and I love bringing my TikTok viral intel to you, if you don't mind.
It's one of my favorite things.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's like a sweet potato craze on TikTok. It was
Oh my God, tell me more.
Highly influenced by two different things. There's a woman named Courtney Cook who's a teacher in the South. I think she's in Tennessee. And she's a British literature teacher, high school. And she just starts filming herself eating lunches. And one of the things she's been eating a lot are whole sweet potatoes that she stuffs with cheese. Like she takes a block of cheese and she cuts out almost like a cheese stick, like string cheese size piece, right? Like cubed. And she
Yes.
stuffs it into her sweet potato. And this trend, everyone started eating this. Something about it, she made it look so good. She used a kind of creamy, buttery cheese. So, anyway, when you see this trend going around, it really makes you want to eat a whole sweet potato, which comes,
Just,
yes,
you mean just like a baked sweet
I mean a
potato?
baked sweet potato, but Courtney Cook's method is you take a whole sweet, regular old sweet potato, orange on the inside, you stick it in a 300-degree oven for an hour and a half. Then you turn off the heat and you let it continue to sort of cook in there for a little while longer. This is not a fast
Mhm.
method, but again, for winter, this is perfect. And she swears that creates an incredible, like custardy, soft texture to the sweet potato that you don't get from other roasting methods. I have
Yeah.
tried it. It's
Does it
amazing.
work?
It's
It's
so good.
amazing.
It makes it more sugary. Sweet potatoes release a syrup, it releases even more syrup. It's
Oh,
delightful.
wow.
It's like hyper steamed.
Well, it kind of reminds me of what happens when you braise chicken. If you let it braise for like an hour instead of 40 minutes, that extra time, that sort of slower cooking actually makes it more tender, right? And when we did our hot potato episode last year, that was one of the big revelations for me as a Midwesterner who ate so many baked potatoes when I was growing up, that the Brits, they cook them for like 1.5 to 2 hours, and that's actually what makes them the most fluffy. So this totally makes sense to
And
me
that
as a
was
non-food
And that
scientist.
was the trend on TikTok last year, which is I think why we talked about it. So thank you, TikTok, for all your trends. And
Yes,
then, okay, the
yes.
second viral social media and TikTok trend is a new Korean method for cooking the Japanese sweet potatoes. So those Japanese sweet potatoes are the ones that are purple on the outside and kind of whitish, yellowish on the inside. They're
Yeah.
not orange.
I'm always a little not sure what to do with these guys. So I'm really excited to learn this.
I love Japanese sweet potatoes. I get them just as often as the orange kind. They're incredibly nutritious. So this
Yeah.
is really fascinating. So for this method, you roast it at 375, a normal temperature. People do it in the air fryer. I don't do it in the air fryer, but convection bake is great. Okay, and then part way in, three-quarters of the way in, you take your sweet potato out and you dunk it into an ice bath for 2 minutes.
Oh my gosh, I did see this. This popped up on my
Yes.
Instagram or something. Yes, you dunk it in ice bath and then you throw it
And then
back
you throw it
in.
back in the oven
Oh
and
my
you let
gosh,
it cook
yes.
another 15, 20 minutes. And people say this is as close to what you can get in a Korean or Japanese convenience store where they sell those whole hot potatoes. And the thing that I found most interesting is everyone says the peel comes off much easier with this technique. I've heard different reports. Some people say it doesn't really make such a huge difference, but others swear that that like makes it that much creamier. Because what you're looking for with all of the sweet potatoes is how to get them from not being too dry and starchy, I think. And I think that's why
Yeah.
you and I both have liked steaming our sweet potatoes and using that Carla Lalli music recipe with the
Yes. Oh, one
tahini.
of my
Right.
favorites. Yeah. But I want to go back to something you said, which is you described when you were talking about the teacher and the method that she came up with, is you described the sweet potato as custardy. And I think to me, that's what you're looking
Yes.
for is
Yeah, it's been a game changer. I've been deep in a sweet potato rotation in my home.
I love that, Sonia. Well, the first item in my market bag is squash. And I find this time of year, walking around the farmer's market, there are all these beautiful winter squashes. And I found this recipe in this book, Green on Greens, for garlicky braised winter squash. You can use any type you want. It's called Zucotte, but the recipe I found online was from a farmer. She made this exact same recipe and she was using a Hubbard squash, which to me told me I should definitely talk about this recipe because a Hubbard squash is something your grandmother used to cook with. And she would make this really beautiful pastry, which you then made for me and brought on an airplane to me.
Well, yes, I was so excited to share it with you. I think I made it a little bit before I saw you and froze it. Hubbard squash can be tricky to find. My grandmother used to find it at her local QFC, which is like a regular kind of grocery chain, not special. And she was friends with the produce people, and they would cut her off chunks of it because it's like an enormous
Oh,
squash.
yes.
And they always knew
Yes.
to set some aside for her whenever it came in because she, the second it was there, she would use it to make pirashki, which is like a traditional Ukrainian Russian Slavic pastry. Anyway, I am obsessed that you found a recipe that uses it, although it's nice that you could use any squash. And I think a butternut works fine in place of Hubbard.
I'm glad that you said butternut because that's actually what she has in her recipe. If you are someone who goes to the farmer's market and says like, "Oh my gosh, what am I going to do with an entire squash like that?" I actually once had a friend call me and say she was trying to cut up a big squash and her knife got stuck and she didn't know what to do and she had to throw the whole thing away,
Oh, you know what?
which
Can I tell
is
you what I actually did
heartbreaking.
with my Hubbard squash when I opened it because it's so huge? Because a friend grew it and gave it to me. I know that sounds very
Uh-huh.
fancy, but that's just what it was.
Wait, did you throw
Yes,
it
I
from
threw it
a
down on the ground. So I threw it outside on my porch so that it could split, and then I rinsed it really, really well.
Of course, but it grows in the ground, so
Yes,
it's
it's
fine,
fine.
but I love that. So anyway, I think the hardest part of this recipe is just like
Cutting it.
basically cutting it open, peeling it. There's a couple of step-by-step instructions on this recipe if you're really one of those people who wants to go in this direction but are unsure about it. And then really what you're doing is you're braising it with garlic, white wine, and butter. That's it. And
Mm.
you're just taking the garlic, the white wine, and the butter and cooking the garlic. She wants you to cook the garlic for maybe 15 or 20 minutes until it's really soft. And then you mash that and you add a little bit more water to it and you steam the squash in it. And,
Mm.
depending on how big your little bites of squash are, it can take 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You add a little parsley on top. You can eat it as a side or a main. To me, this is one of those perfect winter meals that you can have roast chicken with it, or you can serve this with some rice and have a great vegetarian dinner.
Oh, it sounds so good and so simple. I love how Italians always take vegetables and make just like the simplest preparation, and it's all you
Yeah,
need with a good
yeah,
seasonal piece of produce. And that's what we're
of
talking about.
course.
You can also freeze cube squash just for anyone who has extra squash if they invest in a larger one. One you can find here that I really love is called a candy roaster squash, and they tend to be really huge. So I'll often just peel it, cube it, and freeze it, and then you can roast it. You can use it in soups. You could braise it like you just suggested. Carrie, the next thing in my market basket is greens, and specifically the amazing Asian greens that I find I can only really find in winter in their peak form. Things like bok choy, and I also have to say tatsoi, which tatsoi is a darker, more delicate green, and it's one I just throw into my salads all winter long. I don't know if you ever use it.
A couple of our farmers have tatsoi. Tatsoi is one of those that's pretty spicy,
I
right?
wouldn't say it's as spicy as Mizuna.
Okay.
It's a pretty delicate,
That's what I'm
yeah,
thinking of, is
Mizuna is
Mizuna.
really
That one is
spicy.
the one that really like
Yes.
gets your
It looks like more like spinachy. It actually can be really
okay.
beautiful when you buy a whole head. It looks almost like a bouquet of flowers. But bok choy is also something I just love this time of year, and I'll use that in salads too. We've talked about that before. And bok choy is also full of potassium and minerals. It's like a particularly good, nutritious thing to eat in the winter. So there's this recipe for sheet pan scallion chicken with bok choy by Kitchn in the New York Times, and it's as simple as can be. It's, getting your oven piping hot at 450, and then you're making a small sauce for everything that has some scallions, mustard, ginger, garlic, miso, a little sugar, or I use maple syrup, a little salt and pepper, and some oil, and whatever neutral oil if you want. So it's like a very basic kind of miso, garlicky, gingery marinade, super simple.
It makes everything taste
Yeah.
better.
And you
Yes.
toss both your chicken and your bok choy in that, and then you ladle on a sheet pan and cook it.
What kind of chicken pieces are you using for this
That's an
recipe?
important question. I think sheet pan chicken meals like this require bone in, skin on chicken thighs, and that is what she's
Yeah.
suggesting. You could
Yeah.
use whole legs, and that skin and that bone is going to help it keep it juicier as well. She has you add the bok choy at the very beginning, and it gets kind of caramelized and brown. I personally like to sometimes add it halfway through the cooking time.
I was actually thinking the same thing. I'm glad you mentioned that because I like my bok choy to
Some
have a little
tooth.
bit of yeah, some toothiness to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then she just suggests to serve it over rice or mashed potatoes, so spoon those juices on top. It's like a perfect, easy weeknight chicken dinner.
Wow, I love that. And I don't even know if you would need a starch with that.
I know, kind of, if you have enough of the greens and maybe some kimchi or some pickles or some kind of little fun little side, it'd be a pretty great meal as is.
Well, Sonia, the next item in my market bag is a cabbage. And this is another Italian recipe. It's a Venetian smothered cabbage. It's Verze Sofag, which maybe I'm not even saying it the correct way. It really translates to stewed cabbage. There are kind of three main flavors of this, which is garlic, rosemary, and some kind of pork. You take your garlic, a little bit of rosemary, and a little bit of pancetta. You mince it together. It's called a battuto. You kind of saute that for a couple of minutes, and then you throw your cabbage in, a little bit of stock, put a top on, and you slowly braise it for an hour. But the recipe I'm going to link in our show notes also calls for a little bit of onion, and you can either use pork sausage or pancetta. It has a little bit more meat in it. So I think in a way, like you could take that recipe if you want to have a little less meat, great. If you like a meatier cabbage, use what they call for. What I love about this is that it has this really lovely rosemary flavor with the garlic, and the cabbage really melts down. It really reminds me of that farro cabbage soup that we talked about, that you brought us from Six Seasons, where just there's something that happens with the alchemy of cabbage when you cook it for a long time at a low heat, and it becomes so tender.
Yeah, I think we've talked about a couple melty cabbage recipes, but I like this idea of what you're talking about is building a flavor base with garlic, rosemary, and in this case, pancetta or pork sausage. But if you didn't eat pork, I feel like you could do this with a chicken Italian sausage, which has that great fennelly flavor too.
Of
And then you could,
course.
you're talking about instead of like a mirepoix, your flavor base is this. And then you're adding
Exactly.
all that vegetable in a little liquid. I imagine you could use stock or water or even a splash of white wine to sort of help loosen up that process of it melting down. If you didn't want meat at all, I think rosemary and garlic and cabbage is still a delightful side dish.
It's a way of using cabbage the same way that you would use any of your dark greens, like the southern way of cooking dark greens with like a little bit of ham hock or bacon. To your point, you could use a chicken sausage, a turkey sausage that you had, a smoked sausage that would add a smoky flavor to it. You're really taking a whole head of cabbage. This one calls for a Savoy cabbage, which again is one that reminds me of you because of the cabbage rolls that you make of your
My
mom
grandmother
made, your
always
grandparents, your
preferred,
grandmother.
she loves
Yeah.
Savoy cabbage. That was her favorite cabbage. We use cabbage a lot in the winter. Just reminding people that you can do a simple braised cabbage is, I made that recently for a client, like a apple cider braised red cabbage, sort of similar idea to what you're talking about, just out without
Right.
rosemary. And my client loved it so much. And it's like we forget that sauteed or simmered cabbage is
Yeah.
so delicious this time of year. Another thing that's really delicious all through the winter are leeks. In fact, when like everything else seems to go away, leeks remain. And you know that I've talked before about my love of braised leeks. It was one of my best bites of my entire year a few years back. It's one of my favorite recipes. I'll link it again just so people have it. But I also love using leeks in baked goods.
Wait, did you just say I love using leeks in baked
Yes, not
goods?
sweet baked goods, savory baked goods.
Savory
A
baked
baked good
goods.
is a
Okay.
baked good, whether it's sweet or
I was like,
savory.
whoa, stop me in my
It's not
tracks.
a leek cookie, but I love using leeks in tarts and galettes, and I've often combined it with other ingredients. So I love just like a simple puff pastry tart with leek, where you take some leeks and you saute it. The one thing about making any kind of pastry with leek, savory pastry, is that you want to cook it first. Otherwise, it's too fibrous. So sometimes I'll
Right.
braise leeks and use that in a galette or a pastry, or sometimes I'll just take some leeks and saute them with butter and salt and soften them and let them cool before I add them to some kind of tart or quiche or anything like that. I love a simple, just take your puff pastry, score a little border on the edges, add all these caramelized leeks on top and maybe some goat cheese or feta or crumbly cheese and maybe some rosemary or thyme and bake that off and call it a day. You don't even need a recipe. Just go for it, although I will link a recipe. But the
Yeah,
other,
please link your
yeah,
recipe because that already sounds amazing, but you have something more.
yeah, because in my leek experimentations, upside down leek tarts kept coming up. I think Bon Appetit published one a few years back that really caught my eye. And then there's one that I'm going to link from Live, Eat, Learn from Sarah Bond. And I think it's a particularly good one. But what I love about this leek tart is, for one, you make it in a cast iron pan. You
Oh,
You can
wow.
absolutely use puff pastry or store-bought pie dough. You could use either. But what you do is you take your leeks and you halve them lengthwise so that you see all those beautiful little lines of your leek, and you put them cut side down into a pan with butter and salt, shallot or garlic, and you get them sort of cooked and softened. You flip them over on each side until they're really softened. Then you put them cut side down again, and then you put crust on top of the leeks like you would do for any skillet pie, and you cut a little like air hole in it, and then you pop that in the oven and you let that cook, and then when it's done you flip it upside down so that on top are now those beautiful long braised leeks, and underneath is your beautiful golden crust. I think that's just such a nice winter pastry.
It sounds so fancy and impressive. Do you just do that on a regular Tuesday night, or is that when you have people come over?
I
I
mean,
feel
you
like
know me,
when
I
I
would do
to come to your
either.
house, you would do either. It's true. It's
I
true.
sometimes
That
just like
sounds
baking for the fun
crazy
of
good.
baking, but if I'm going to bake something like this, I'm sharing it with more than me and just Jonathan. I'll give a slice to a neighbor, or it would be something I would have people over. I think it's a really nice brunch or lunch item too. That and a little salad is a great meal.
It's all you need, especially in the winter. We're looking for foods that kind of keep us warm and bolster us through these winter months. Well, Sonia, the next item in my farmer's market bag are turnips. And I gotta say, I did not grow up eating turnips, but I fell in love with them when I worked at the farmer's market, when I worked at Alex Weiser's stand. They would bring these tiny turnips to the market. There are many people who work at a farm stand, especially a big farm stand like that. And a couple of the guys came up to me. They're like, "You have to taste these turnips." And I was like, "You mean just eat them?" And they're like, "Yeah, just
They're
eat it like
so
a
good
carrot."
raw.
And I was so surprised by the flavor. So the recipe that I'm bringing is honey glazed turnips. It's
Mm.
very, very simple. For me, as a person who's new at cooking turnips, a recipe like this is really easy. Basically, you add the turnips, some water, some butter, some honey, salt, and pepper to a pan. You cover it, you braise it for a little while. Once they're tender, then you take the top off, you boil it until the liquid evaporates, and then you cook it for an extra 3 to 4 to 5 minutes until those turnips brown on the sides. You
Mm.
kind of want, you're sort of caramelizing them at the end.
I love those Japanese turnips. I think that's what you're talking about, the small white ones. They're so tender. I typically just eat them sliced raw in a salad, add them almost like a radish to things. They're so tender. And I know sometimes people ask us how we store things from the market. When I get turnips from the market, which they usually sell like the small turnips in those bundles, if you can find
Yeah.
the ones with the greens on top, that's what I'm always going for. Because actually, those turnip greens are one of my favorite greens of this entire season. And so what I do is I like cut off all the greens. I wash the turnips. I put that in a glass jar or an airtight container. And then I wash the greens. I'll add
Right.
those greens to soups or beans. I am obsessed with them.
I love them too. And I think a turnip is something you want to kind of treat the same way you would a carrot. So you want to make sure that it has like a little bit of moisture in there too so it doesn't dry out, right? Is that what you do?
Yeah, I guess I just always rinse them and stick them in a jar and put a lid on it. Kind of like what I do with radishes. I know some people who store carrots in water. I don't do that, but I do think that they benefit from a good rinse when you get home and then putting them in a good container.
Yeah, I do the same. I rinse them and then I throw them directly into the
Yeah.
glass container. So there's a little bit of water kind of clinging to
Yeah,
them.
I think that's a good point. So, we can't talk about winter vegetables without talking about your favorite vegetable of all time, beets.
For anyone who is new listening to our podcast, Sonia loves beets so much. She also had a restaurant called Beetroot. And I am a person who, when I was a kid, my babysitter forced me to eat beets until I gagged.
Aw.
And so I've always kind of had that
Aversion,
reflex,
yeah,
an aversion to
which is
them. And
so
so
fair. And I do think, they do taste a little earthy,
they are
which
earthy.
some
They taste
people,
to me like
yeah,
dirt.
and some people don't like
Yeah.
that. I want to point out a couple varieties of beets. If you're not someone who loves beets, I think there's some newer ones that are more available. I even saw it at Whole Foods the other day. There's Badger Flame beets, which are my
What?
absolute favorite beet on the planet. It's what we used to serve at my restaurant. They sound like what they are. They're extremely orange. They're kind of long and oblong. They're so sweet. I think they're a really good entry beet if you've never tried one and if you can find them. But another one that's a lot easier to find is a golden beet if you can't find a badger flame, which I understand doesn't grow everywhere. Not everyone has it.
I'm just laughing because I definitely have seen orange beets, but I've never been like, oh, look, it's a badger flame
Well,
beet.
it might not be. It might be a golden beet. So,
Just a golden
yeah, and they're
beet.
different.
Yeah.
They're a
Okay.
different shape. They look more like football shaped than turnip shaped. So you may not have, they may not.
This sums up our friendship in like every way. Your absolute love of beets so much that you built a whole restaurant around them. And my like, I don't know, a beet is kind of just a beet, and I generally avoid them.
Like all things, we empower everyone to do what is best for
Yes,
them.
of course.
I'm not here to convince any anti-beet people to like beets, but if you're like me and you're like, I love a good beet, especially this time of year, there's this beautiful recipe from David Tanis, who I think is another expert vegetable recipe developer.
Yeah, he comes out of Chez Panisse, of course. He
Yeah.
like knows how to cook a vegetable, and he lives in California.
Yeah, and he has this great recipe for golden beet and beet greens salad with a yogurt, mint, and dill sauce.
If there was ever a recipe made for you, Sonia, that's this
Right? I
one.
mean, I already make plenty of beet salads with some kind of yogurt, or I like labna. I always
Yeah.
add dill to my beets. These are the common threads of all my beet salads, but I also want to have a recipe I could share with other people. And there's some things here that I even got to learn from in this recipe, which is he's adding the beet greens to the salad, which is not actually something I typically do. I save my beet greens and I'll saute them, but I don't
Right?
typically add them to my beet salads. So he has you cook off your beets, which you can just do by roasting in an oven. I just roast them whole. You can wrap them in foil or put them in a covered baking dish, and then they're so easy to peel once they're cooked. And then you let them cool. And then he has you wash your beet greens really well. And then you drain them. And then you cook them in a pan just on the skillet for just a couple minutes with some coriander and cumin seeds, which I really love the idea that he takes these spices and grinds them fresh or cooks them whole. Either one
Yeah.
would work so well here. And then you have make a really simple vinaigrette with onion and garlic and vinegar and oil. And then it's all about dressing everything. So first you season your beets with salt and pepper, you dress them in the vinaigrette, then you separately dress the beet greens, and then you'll also make a yogurt sauce, which sounds again like a really big step, but it's not. It's just yogurt, garlic, salt and pepper, and that mixture of cumin and coriander and a little bit of olive oil. It's like a couple elements, but each of them is being
They're
cross-purposed.
very, yeah, they're very simple, and it's a way of taking a vegetable and letting it shine. Well, you're reminding me of this recipe that Justine Doran, that I was one of my best bites, where she takes whole coriander seed and sautés it with green beans.
Yes.
And it's like a green bean, coriander seed, mint. It's kind of specific in the way that you do it, but it yields this really delicious thing that's really just a great tasting vegetable, and
Yes.
that's what it sounds like you're describing.
Well, and I think dill is a really common pairing with beets, but we don't often think about coriander and cumin as a great spice for them. And those are
Yeah.
spices that are used in many beet preparations in North Africa and the Middle East. And so it's kind of, I love how he's married sort of these two different spice and flavor profiles in this one dish with that beautiful yogurt sauce, which I think every beet benefits from.
Yeah, which brings a little light to your kind of dark, cold winter days.
Exactly.
Well, Sonia, I feel like we can't talk about the Winter's Farmers Market without talking about parsnips. Again, this is a root vegetable that I didn't even know existed maybe until my 20s when I started cooking for this family. And the only rule was that they needed two vegetables on the table. So it really got me cooking a lot of vegetables. They loved carrots, and so I mixed the carrots and the parsnips and I would roast them together. But this is a parsnip souffle.
Souffles have come up recently because my friend Amanda, her mom, often makes a souffle for entertaining, like a cheese souffle. And I'm like,
Really?
that is so elegant and classy. And so I love that you're sharing a parsnip souffle.
Well, it feels very French. I will say I went to Paris a couple of years ago and there were four of us. We ate at a souffle restaurant and every single thing that we ate was a souffle. We ordered like six savory souffles and three sweet souffles. And it really made me fall in love with souffles. Really, what you're doing is you peel your parsnips, you cut them up into pieces, you dice them, you boil them, you mash them, and then you make a bechamel, which is just like butter, flour, whole milk, add a little nutmeg, add a little cayenne. You whisk in that parsnip puree that you've got, and then you beat in egg yolks one at a time. And then you beat your egg whites separately until they're stiff peaks, and you very gently combine these two elements together.
Like
Add
you
a little bit
fold
of,
it in, like you fold those
yeah,
stiffened egg whites into your other batter.
yeah, this creamy, rich batter that you've got gets really lightened by all these egg whites. And then you add a little bit of Parmesan cheese and you bake it in the oven. 35, 40 minutes later, you've got a souffle on your table. It's a little bit like the idea of your leek tart. You would take this beautiful souffle and then you would serve it with a salad, and it's rich but still light. It still gives you those winter vibes.
Yeah, I think a souffle is a very elegant dish, and I think it's intimidating to a lot of people. I think they're afraid it's not going to turn out. I think it's far more forgiving than people realize. And also, no one's going to judge you on your technical merit. No one's
No.
going to sit there and be like, is this a perfect souffle? You can't really go wrong with beautiful parsnips, eggs. The worst case scenario, it turns out a little flat, but it's still going to taste good.
It's still going to taste delicious with all those parsnips and cream and a little bit of nutmeg.
I think we have to mention citrus this time of year. It's definitely the thing I miss most about California. We do have some citrus now in Oregon, but I'm not going to pretend it's anything like going to the Hollywood Farmers Market with you or going to the Santa Monica Farmers Market with you. And actually, when I think of citrus salads, I think of you because of that one brunch that we hosted where we made that just gorgeous citrus salad with every available kind of orange and mandarin and tangerine that was at the market at that time.
Yeah, I mean, everywhere in our markets. And also, like, I grow a lot of citrus in my yard. I think, again, that's not something I at all grew up having around me, but my family would always have boxes of citrus, and we would have them in the refrigerator that we had in our garage, and we would have grapefruits and oranges and eat them for breakfast. But the California markets are really something else.
And fortunately, California ships its citrus to many different places. So a citrus salad, just cut up beautiful rounds of seasonal citrus, is always good. But another way that I really love using citrus this time of year is as a topping for rice pudding, because I also love rice pudding this time of year.
My God, that's so funny. So do you just make like a regular creamy rice pudding and then top it with citrus?
I mean, first you take arborio rice or short grain sushi rice, milk or non-dairy milk. If you're doing non-dairy, whole coconut milk, like from a can, is best. And then some sugar and some vanilla. And you are just cooking that down until it's rich and creamy. You do kind of stir periodically for a while. It takes about 40 minutes. So worth the effort. You let that chill. And then once it's chilled, what I like to do is take rounds of blood orange, cara, tangerines or mandarins, whatever looks good. Peel them, slice them into rounds. I'll put the little chilled rice pudding into little serving dishes, and then I top them with those beautiful rounds of citrus. And at the end, I like to drizzle on a little bit of date syrup, which is also called Ceylon.
Oh, wow.
Because I also think of like dates and citrus. They all go together. They also are very California to me. And that rich, creamy dessert of rice pudding with something so bright and flavorful and acidic. It doesn't even have to be fancy citrus. It can be a regular Old Navel orange.
Yeah, regular navel
There's
orange.
something
Yeah.
that works so well about that together, especially this time of year.
I love that you brought this to our conversation because I really did not grow up eating rice pudding at all. We had vanilla pudding, of course, chocolate pudding, banana pudding, like instant.
Yeah.
But I love this combination of a rich, creamy pudding with this bright citrus.
Well, in our family, we never had the other kinds of pudding and almost only ever had rice pudding. It was such a comfort dish in my home. Sometimes my mom would make tapioca from scratch, but that was really rare. But I think this would be good with tapioca pudding too, or any pudding, frankly, like a vanilla pudding. I mean, I think when fruit is at its prime, and citrus is at its prime right now, you want to do as little to it as possible. And so you're just pairing it with something else that tastes good with it.
Yeah, I think that's a great reminder. Just get out there to your winter farmers market, pick up what you see that looks good and interesting to you, and then come home and cook it as simply as you can. And I think that is the magic of this time of year.
And always the magic of the farmer's market, right?
Yes, true.
Well, until next time.
Until next time.
Bye.
Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.